Joining me now is Glenn Gerstel, former general counsel for the National Security Agency, and now a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Glenn, I wanted to play the warning from Meet the Press from Jennifer Granholm, the Energy Secretary, and get you to react on the other side. Stand by.
I do think that we need to send this strong message that paying of ransomware only exacerbates and accelerates this problem. You are encouraging the bad actors when that happens.
Glenn, so she's warning that they could take down the power grid. She's saying they should not pay ransomware. We had a case like Atlanta for months, unable to get into their critical 911 and police agencies because of ransomware that they refused to pay. Others, as we know, the Colonial Pipeline rather paid. What are the answers, and how do you address this?
Well, the Secretary's right in that this is a huge problem, and it's one that's going to get worse. We're vulnerable across a wide array of sectors. But on the question of whether it makes sense to ban the payment of ransom, that's a really tough question. That's one of those issues where it makes sense in general for society as a whole. But then when you get down to each individual case, if it's your company or your hospital, there's an extraordinary incentive to pay the ransom and make sure you get back to business, or you get to take care of your patients, or in the case of Colonial Pipeline, that's able to open the spigots to allow gasoline to flow back on the eastern United States. So it's a very, very tough question.
And we're dealing with two threats here. There's SolarWinds, which attacked government agencies and major corporations. And that was definitely, we've been told, from the Russian intelligence, the military intelligence, GRU, I guess it was. So that's state-sponsored. That's what we've seen before from Russia, from China, from North Korea, from Iran. And then there are these ransomware, these criminal groups, hackers, and they are operating, many from Eastern Europe, many from Russian soil. And the president has not blamed Vladimir Putin, but certainly they could not be operating without the acknowledgement, without the protection of the Kremlin.
That's absolutely right. It's probably a little unrealistic to think we're going to be able to stop cyber espionage. After all, the United States and our allies do it too. It's an important source of information for us. And, it's something that's going to be an area that we can try to control. But as to whether we can actually stop it or whether it even makes sense to, that's doesn't seem to make sense. But on the other hand, ransomware, which is just pure maliciousness, is something we should stop. They both have one thing in common, and that's Russia. Russia is either actively encouraging these ransomware gangs, or alternatively, they're just turning a blind eye to them. It's inconceivable that there would be a ransomware gang operating inside Russia that would undertake operations like this that would have international repercussions without if not the blessing of Vladimir Putin, at least him turning a blind eye. And we should do something about that part.
The president's holding meetings today, meeting with national security officials. He did yesterday, getting ready for Vladimir Putin and for the rest of this big foreign trip. His debut as president at NATO, as well as the G7. And then, of course, Vladimir Putin next week in Geneva. This is what Tony Blinken had to say, the Secretary of State, on Axios about dealing with this whole issue with Putin.
One of the reasons that the president will be meeting with President Putin in a week's time is not in spite of these aggressions, these attacks. It's because of them, to tell him directly and clearly what he can expect from the United States if aggressive, reckless actions toward us continue.
So what can the president do besides tough talk? He wants to have a good working relationship with Putin on a number of other issues, but he wants to be tough on Ukraine, on this cyber hacking and other aggressions where Putin seems to be, setting the stage for a tough relationship.
It's another complex issue. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that meeting between Biden and Putin, but I'm sure President Biden is going to be very tough and make it very clear that this is unacceptable behavior on the part of Russia and the Kremlin. And we know what the response is going to be from Vladimir Putin. He's, number one, is going to deny it, say you can't prove it anyway. And besides, even if there was someone operating inside Russia, a criminal gang, if they're not violating Russian law, and apparently they aren't, then I don't have to take any action against it. And at the end of the day, I think we need to recognize that while we absolutely should be tougher against Russia in this regard, and I worked at the NSA and saw what U.S. Cyber Command is capable of doing, so I know what we're able to do, and we should step it up. At the end of the day, we have to recognize that for two reasons, it's going to be really tough. One, there are limits to how much more we can do in the way of sanctions with Russia. We don't really trade with them that much, so it's not really going to hurt them. And then second, there are just practical limits on what we're going to do. We're not going to turn the lights out in all of Moscow. That could cause hospitals to close and ratchet up this. Putin would feel forced to take retaliatory action. So there's a sort of narrow window in which we can operate. And at the end of the day, that alone is not going to solve the problem. It's a step, but it's a mistake to think it's going to solve the problem.
There is some pressure on the president to be aggressive, to be offensive. And we saw what happened in 2018 with the midterms, where we did turn out some lights, at least shut down some of the hackers and protect the elections in 2018.
So in 2018, the United States made a really extraordinary effort to go after election interference on the part of Russia. That was something that was government sponsored, and there were ways we could take steps against the government to put a halt to that. This is something that's a little different. This is ransomware. And from Putin's point of view, it's okay if it continues. He's not particularly disturbed by it. It's fun for him to watch us get in trouble here because of it. So I think it's a very different thing for us to try to stop ransomware gangs in Russia through cyber means. That's a lot more difficult, and sending a message that way is going to be more difficult.
But SolarWinds is another category, is it not?
SolarWinds is another category, and at the end of the day, I think we should complain about it. It was an extraordinary, unprecedented breach of federal government systems and private systems. It's just over the line, and we need to make clear that we're not going to tolerate that. But stopping all cyber espionage, again, probably not going to happen.